every year we have this debate. So here we are again, as the GMs sit down, and the playoff format is something we're always going to talk about. And we see the way other leagues do it. There's talk of changing things in Major League Baseball. I see that just as a distraction from what's going on with the Houston Astros. I don't think there's any intention of actually changing the playoff format other than to, hey, look over here, hey, don't pay attention to all those players that are still playing that should be suspended. So that's how I see it. And then the NBA is talking about maybe some big changes with their playoff format. And over the years, we've seen it. Over the years, we've seen as the league's grown, certain general managers saying we should expand the playoffs. The only time that I kind of shrug and say whatever is if it's a GM of a team that's one of those fringe teams that's probably going to miss. Like, I think we should increase the number of teams to make the playoffs to 32. Listen, Detroit, can't be doing that. There aren't even 32 teams in the league yet. So, it's always going to be a debate, and I'm sure that there are going to be some preliminary discussions. The GM meetings are today. There's likely have been some preliminary discussions, which would be like one or two GMs. But here's the thing. The NHL is not actually really run by Gary Bettman. So we always have this discussion. People are always like, Bettman, this league's just screwed because of Bettman. Owners love that. Every time you get mad at Bettman, the owners give him some more money. Because for many years, and I can remember, back in the 80s and before, I mean, we had other people leading the league, but the owners still got a lot of flack. A lot. And what Harold Ballard wouldn't have done back in the 80s to have had a Gary Bettman out there speaking for him. So Gary Bettman really, he works for the owners. If he was doing a bad job, they'd fire him on the spot. He's not, so he gets paid very well. League revenues go up. He is behind them 110%. He does his job, and he does it well enough that he's gotten raises. He can basically, as far as I can tell, he can be in this job for as long as he wants until he chooses to retire. And part of it is because the league's made a ton of money under his watch. Now, the one concern I have with Gary Bettman right now is, I mean, there's video I've done on Gary Bettman on the video. I'm starting to think he's a clone, and I'm thinking it because they had a ceremony here in Vancouver for the Sedins, and then there was a jersey retirement on the other coast, and he was at that, and then there was a ceremony somewhere else, and he was at that, and I thought, okay, so there's no way. Either the man doesn't need sleep, which would go into that whole potentially vampire thing that I had in my brain about a year ago, or there's just, I don't know, maybe he is a clone. Maybe there are multiple Gary Bettmans. Maybe at some point, some night we'll have two jersey retirements on opposite coasts. Gary Bettman's at both, and we can go clone theory proven. But all kidding aside, he does his job, and as long as he's doing the job for the owners, and it takes our ire away from the ownership group and it puts it on Bettman, that's what they want. So there are still owners who take a lot of flack, but in general, it is nowhere near what it was, say, 30, 40 years ago. And it's nowhere near what it would be if you didn't have Bettman out there as the face of the owners. But he works for the owners. So if you're going to talk about changing the format, you have to get the owners on board. And the owners don't like paying extra travel expenses. What's the cheapest way to have playoffs? Divisional. Divisional playoffs are the cheapest way to have playoffs. And when I see people saying, well, it's not going to be that much more money. No. It doesn't matter. They're saying, what's the cheapest way to have playoffs? And from an NHL perspective, I can understand it because it does create rivalries. I look back to Boston versus Montreal. They met in the playoffs every year. I think it was 9 in a row. And we really looked forward to that. I can say that as a fan of Boston, and I know there were Montreal fans that looked forward to it as well. And it was not a lopsided feud throughout. There were different years where it would be completely different series, and you couldn't really tell at the start who necessarily was going to win between the two teams. So that's something that the NHL really enjoys because those feuds are important. And you look at the feud between Pittsburgh and Philly, or Pittsburgh and Washington, and it's important. And Pittsburgh and Philly right now would meet in the first round. So Boston are the number 1 seed in the East. Number 8 is Columbus. So that'd be your matchup in the first round. Washington would be the number 2 seed as the division winner. Now, if you're going to say, well, the division winner shouldn't automatically get a number 2 seed, that's a problem too then, because you're basically saying we should abolish divisions, which again, owners aren't going to go for. And if you win your division, you should get a top seed, because here's 86 points for Washington, 87 points for Tampa. Washington Capitals could say, hey, we had to go through the Metro teams to get our 86 points. Tampa got to play Detroit. They got to play Ottawa. They got to play Florida. They got to play teams that are lower down. And we had to go through pretty darn difficult teams to get to where we are right now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 of the top 10 teams are, 6. No, actually, even more than that. It's 7 of the top 10, isn't it? Yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 7 of the top 10 teams in the East are in the Metro. So again, that means that, okay, well, Washington's point total being lower than Tampa shouldn't be a problem. Well, then you're on a slippery slope. Because then teams in the West are going to be like, well, right. So we had this schedule and we had this travel, and you guys didn't have that. You look at Pittsburgh going out to California, and I heard them saying, on the last game of that California trip, well, teams in the East Coast aren't used to this travel like the teams in the West. So once they get to the end of this West Coast trip, you can understand if they're really, really tired. To which a team in the West Coast would say, right, yeah, we do this all the time. And so it is definitely a matter of travel being worse in the West. It's not as different as it was. Like, the difference between travel in the West and the East used to be really, really bad. And like Vancouver's schedule back in the late 80s was brutal. But while it's evened out, and Seattle's definitely going to help in that way as well, there is still something to be said for the fact that there are East Coast teams that can go 20 games without going outside of their time zone. And does that make it easier for them? That's up to the NHL to decide. And right now they don't really have to. So 1 versus 8, you end up with this scenario where you get Tampa Bay against the Islanders, you get Toronto against Washington, you get Philadelphia against Pittsburgh, which is also what you get at the divisional level. And it doesn't really change things much, really. Columbus would play Boston right now in the divisional playoffs we have. Washington would play the Islanders. And then you have Toronto against Tampa. So 2 of the 4 matchups are exactly the same anyways. Now out West, that's where it gets a little different. Out West, you only have 1 team in the Pacific with home ice, and that's Vegas. Vegas has 80 points. Colorado has 85. So right there, you'd have Colorado fans saying, why are we a lower seed than Vegas? Why did they get home ice in the second round or third round or second round if they meet them? So if you get 1, 2, 3, and 4 ending up winning their rounds, you get St. Louis against Dallas. You get Vegas at home against Colorado, even though Vegas has fewer points than both Dallas and Colorado. And of course, that would rob us of Edmonton and Calgary in the first round in the Battle of Alberta. Edmonton would be in Dallas, Calgary would be in Colorado, Vancouver would be in Vegas because they haven't fallen out of the playoffs yet, Nashville would be in St. Louis. And of course, what I don't have on the board is other teams that aren't in the playoffs right now in the West, because I want to keep this as simple as possible. But again, you've got Florida, Rangers, Carolina, all have more points than Nashville. Rangers and Carolina would both seed ahead of Vancouver. Vancouver's 17th overall in the NHL right now. And this is what's been bugging me, is that there are Canuck fans who get all mad like we're third in the division, and Shannon doesn't give us enough credit. They're 17th in the league. So there's credit, and then there's sort of for the division, things are going pretty well, but in general, they're not one of the best teams in the league. But that aside, if we do 1 versus 16, all this disappears, and then you have to convince owners to do a balanced schedule, which they hate. Balanced schedule was done in the early 80s. It resulted in Vancouver meeting Philadelphia in the first round of the playoffs one year and meeting Buffalo in the first round the next year. So that doesn't work. And then I've seen people saying, well, why don't they do 2-3-2 if they're worried about travel? Oh, they're allowed to do 2-3-2. No team in their right mind will do a 2-3-2 series. So if you do 2-3-2, And for people who don't know, that means that St. Louis would get home ice for the first 2 games against Nashville. Nashville gets the next 3 in Nashville. The Vancouver Canucks, as a number 7 seed in 1994, they reached the finals in large part due to 2-3-2. Both against Dallas and against Toronto. By getting a split on the road, you get your next 3 games at home. As long as you hold serve at home, that series is over. So home ice advantage, and I remember Don Cherry just raging when the Canucks were able to make 2-3-2 work in their favor against both Dallas and Toronto. That's why teams have never picked 2-3-2 again. It was an option. I don't think it is now, but it was an option for years. And there's not a single GM owner in the league that said, let's do 2-3-2, because it gives a huge advantage to the road team in those first 2 games. Just get a split. Just get a split, and then you can hold serve at home. And let's just say you get a split in your first 2, and then you win 2 out of 3 at home. Well, now the team with home ice advantage is in a must-win situation in both Game 6 and 7, and the pressure is huge for the team that's at home. That's why it's 2-2-1-1-1. And that's why we're not going to see that change. So a 2-3-2 scenario does not interest owners and hasn't. Now, the reseeding idea as well, I don't think GMs and owners like that either. And not only that, this is where NBC and Sportsnet would come in as well. So if we're going to do a reseeding in the second round, well, they like to be able to sell the series ahead of time. They like to be able to have the commercials out there for, hey, in round 2 you're going to get this. Well, they wouldn't know. And it was one of the complaints they had with 1 versus 8. They had no idea, perhaps until the end of a Game 7, who was playing who, and they might only have a day to promote that series. So they didn't like 1 versus 8 on a network level either. And that, again, forces Gary Bettman to say, well, we have to make sure that the television networks are happy as well. It is not just a matter of fairness. It'd be great if it was just a matter of fairness, where you could just say, all right, well, 1 versus 16, and we'll just have a nice balanced schedule. But there's travel, there's networks, and there's all of that to consider as well. I've also seen the SPHL scenario, Southern Pro Hockey League, where the team that finishes first can challenge a team that finished lower, any team they want, and they want to play them in the first round. That's dangerous, though, because you're telling them, we think we can beat you guys. And they're like, oh, you think you can beat us? Good luck with that. I can't see the NHL ever doing that. I can't. And I think the reasoning would be, let's say you're Dallas. Just using Dallas as an example. 81 points. You have earned your spot as a team with home ice in the first round. And let's just say St. Louis is the number 1 seed, can pick almost anybody. So they say, we want Dallas. Or, okay, let's just say that Dallas is a top 4 seed, that they can't be picked by St. Louis. So St. Louis picks Edmonton. So now Edmonton, who finished above Calgary, Vancouver, and Nashville, now they get to play the toughest challenge in the first round, while Nashville might get Dallas, where maybe that's a great matchup for Nashville. So I can't see, and again, in order to make these changes, you have to get more than half the owners in the NHL to say, you got it. And I can't see a scenario where that happens. I can't, because they would all, I think, to a man, they would say that seems kind of Bush League. That doesn't feel professional. That doesn't reward teams that have finished with higher seedings necessarily, because now they can get picked off in the first round. And again, so Pittsburgh, Boston could say we love playing Pittsburgh, and they do. Boston say we love playing Pittsburgh, we want Pittsburgh in the first round. And we want to avoid, or they say we want to, what if Toronto goes on a bit of a run and they end up being a number 5 seed, and then Boston goes, no, we want Toronto. I can hear the Toronto fans now. This is the stupidest setup ever. Who decided on this? This is ridiculous. This is dumb. Boston shouldn't be allowed to do this. The NHL rigged this. And then Washington could turn around and go, well, we don't want Pittsburgh. We'll take Columbus. So then Columbus technically is facing a team that's 8 points closer to them in the standings than what they should be. I just can't see the NHL going with a challenge scenario. I can't see 2-3-2. I can't see reseedings. And honestly, we have this set up for now, and until the owners say we're okay with changing it back to 1 versus 8, I can't see it. And not only that, but if we change back to 1 versus 8, every single year we're still having this conversation. That a team that finished with more points is out of the playoffs in one conference than the other. And then I see conversation like, well, Carolina could just go over to the other conference. Well, why is Carolina getting screwed? Why is Carolina being put in this situation? And then you'd have St. Louis going, wait a minute, why do we have to face a team in another conference? Why are we going through the travel that we likely wouldn't have to go through in the Western Conference? What did we do? We're the number 1 seed. We shouldn't have to face a team from another conference. Let's say the Rangers get in there, and let's just say the number 1 seed is Vegas. Let's say Vegas goes on a run. They're the number 1 seed, and they got to play the Rangers in the first round. And you could have the Oilers and the Flames playing each other. And Vegas would be like, wait, why are we going all the way across the coast, from coast to coast, to play against the Rangers, rather than get a team that's in our conference? So that doesn't work either. I can't see the NHL going for that. So, could the NHLPA be interested in that? Yeah, because they don't care about travel costs. They really don't. With the way that the travel is for the players, it really doesn't affect them as much as it used to. Now that everybody's got their own airlines, their own planes, their own everything's fine. They don't have to travel coach. They don't have to travel even first class on American Airlines or anything. Everybody's got all their own stuff now, and that's great. But for owners, they do look at the costs of travel. And for the NHL, for NBC, and for Sportsnet, they want to know ahead of time what that schedule is going to look like in the playoffs. And a lot of these scenarios would take that away. And not only that, but think about it from an NBC perspective where you go, hey, we can get Pittsburgh and Philly in the first round. Or we could have Pittsburgh against Dallas because they're right near each other in points. So let's just say they're the 8 and 9 teams in the league. No, they want Pittsburgh and Philly. They could sell that. They know that's going to get really big ratings. Pittsburgh and Dallas, not so much. Philadelphia and the Oilers, not so much. So, again, there are a lot of things to consider. There are reasons why they use the seedings that they do right now. And I'm sure we will continue to have this debate. And I would imagine at the end of this season, there will be at least one team in the East who has more points than a team that finishes in the playoffs in the West. The one caveat with that I would throw in is Nashville's played pretty well lately. I do think Nashville will finish with more points than Florida and either the Rangers, Carolina, or Columbus, whoever ends up out of there as from those 3 teams. And while Vancouver has had its struggles lately, they appear to be on their way down. Minnesota's been playing very well. The game last night against Washington, they lost, but it was close. And I do think that we're going to see some pretty decent totals in the West by the end of the year. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And hey, I can't wait to see all the comments when the playoffs are roll around about who should be in and who isn't. Because last year, it was Montreal. Montreal was the team that missed the playoffs in the East that would have made it in the West, and Colorado made it in the West when they wouldn't have in the East. And that conversation continued until, well, Colorado knocked out Calgary, so that conversation just died right on the spot. So do not take teams lightly just because of where they finish overall. Once the playoffs start, it really is a league of great parity. Thank you guys so much for watching. Do hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. Just happened upon this video. I will talk to you again soon.